Steam and electric train service to Los Altos began in 1908 along what we know now as the Foothill Expressway. Coaches filled with prospective land buyers were transported to the area to enjoy a free picnic and to see what developers called the jewel of the peninsula. Tonight we'll explore why the railroad was so important in the development of Los Altos. Hello, I'm Nan Geschke, your host of the Los Altos History Show. Our guests tonight are Bob Brown and Fred Vertel. Welcome, Bob and Fred.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on the show tonight. Both Bob and Fred were going to discuss with us about the railroad industry and its very proactive role in the formation of Los Altos, but both Bob and Fred share a passion in model railroading, and they've spawned kind of second careers for themselves. And I thought maybe we could get a little background about both of you before we got started on the history of the railroading here in Los Altos. So how about you starting, Bob?
Okay, well, I'm a local boy. I was raised in Palo Alto, went through the Palo Alto schools, graduated from Pali High, went on to San Jose State, spent 2 years in the service, married. My wife and I moved to Los Altos in 1964. I spent some 35 years teaching in Palo Alto in the elementary schools, where my children spent a lot of time building models. As you spoke of it as a passion, and that's a perfect word. Model railroading has been a passion of mine for probably some 54 years. Because I remember the day I walked into a magazine store and found a copy of the Model Railroader magazine for October 1944. And I haven't looked back since. It's been a wonderful hobby. I've made many wonderful friends through the hobby. And in 1964, my wife and I started a small magazine, which I ran the first copies off on the Ditto machine at our school. And then in 1975, we decided to go professional. And while I continued to teach school, my wife worked on the magazine and ran the business. And we now publish a magazine called the Narrow Gauge and Shortline Gazette. It sells in some 23 countries around the world, some 16,000 copies every other month. And we're very proud of it, and it's now a retirement income for my wife and myself.
Oh, that's marvelous, and I think we have a copy of it here.
Yes, I brought one in.
Maybe we can get camera one to come up on it so that you can see what it looks like. It's quite a handsome publication, Bob.
We're very proud of it.
Did we get that? Great. Thanks. Now it's your turn, Fred.
Well,
how about Fred Vertel?
Actually, my interest in railroading started at a very early age because I had the good fortune of being born in the same town that was the birthplace of the modern-day diesel locomotive, and that's LaGrange, Illinois. And in addition, my father worked for the company, so I had access to a lot of train materials and periodicals and so forth early on. Our family moved to San Jose during the Second World War, and I graduated from Bellarmine. San Jose stayed in business, went on to become a stockbroker, was married in 1963, and at that time purchased my home in Los Altos that I live in today. My wife passed away in 1985, and at that time I retired and started to pursue my early interest in railroading, pursue it in earnest at that time. So that's about it.
And I can attest he has done that in earnest.
In earnest.
We visited Fred this past weekend, or this past week, and it was just amazing, Fred. It was so much fun. But let's go back to you now, Bob. Now, how did how did the railroad get started here in Los Altos? I mean, why is the town where it is, and now why not up towards the El Camino, which was the main thoroughfare? I mean, what was the impetus for the railroad to even come through here in this part of the valley?
Well, of course, this is a beautiful area, and people wanted to settle, and it's a perfect area for commuting to San Francisco. So back around the turn of the century, a company called the Interurban Electric Railway decided to build a line from Mayfield, or South Palo Alto, up to Los Gatos to haul commuters. And, but they had to go across some property owned by Sarah Winchester of Winchester House fame. And she owned, I understand, the area around the triangle of Los Altos, downtown Los Altos. So that she wouldn't sell them right away, but she would sell them the whole plot so they could build a railroad. And I'm told that as I've read when they laid their surveyor stakes each day, she would come out at night and pull the surveyor stakes up so they couldn't produce their railroad. But the following year, the Interurban Railway sold the property to the Southern Pacific. And the Southern Pacific then had an idea of building a branch from run down through Mayfield or South Palo Alto up through Los Altos to Los Gatos, down over the mountains to Santa Cruz, and down the coast to L.A.
Oh.
And that was, I think, the big impetus to get the trackage in here. I don't understand why they also, at the same time, however, built an electric interurban railroad called the Peninsular Railway. And for much of the distance, at least up through Monte Vista, they paralleled each other. So Los Altos was well served by two railroads designed to haul commuters to and from San Francisco.
Isn't that amazing? And now we have none. Right.
Now none, exactly.
Now what influenced people to buy land here, Fred, do you think? Was the railroad a big impetus for that?
Well, as Bob just said, certainly the land was very beautiful, is very beautiful. But talk about an impetus, the earthquakes in California are an impetus for change, as I guess they are anywhere. But the San Francisco earthquake and fire caused a lot of people to be uneasy about living in a large city, and so they started to look towards the country. And those that had the means, the wherewithal to do it, looked towards residence in areas such as Los Altos, which was ideal, especially because of the commuter service that it provided. And so I have to say that the earthquake was one of the strongest moves to get people to look towards this valley.
Right. And now I understand that the railroads ran up until the late middle 60s. But the interurban actually declined in the 30s, and that was primarily because the Southern Pacific sort of let it go. It was losing money. Now I know that both you and Fred, Bob and Fred, are going to be involved in the Los Altos History Center, Education Center, which is going to break ground in the next about 6 months from now. And I know that you are going to be building a part of our permanent exhibit, and it's not really going to be a train exhibit per se. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
It's really an operating diorama of the downtown Los Altos area, and the train is of course a strong factor, so the train will be operating through Los Altos. But it's a diorama. Okay,
so it's going to be a representation of what the train service actually was in the town.
And as you know, today one of the main central features of Los Altos is the old Southern Pacific Depot. And that will of course be a main focus point for the diorama.
Right, and I understand at one point that depot was a couple of old boxcars.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, at the beginning it was 2 old boxcars. The Southern Pacific did the town up right. They built a classical, beautiful depot. Most Southern Pacific depots are wood. This one's stucco.
Yes.
And I think it has, to me, a Spanish style to it.
Yeah.
So they took some time to build something that really represented the town and the area.
And it's actually eligible. It still exists today. It's now known as Maria's Antiques.
That's
and
right.
it's actually eligible to be on the National Register of Historic Places.
Yes.
So it's a very important building in our town.
It must have been a very exciting place in the 20s.
Yes.
With the interurban cars coming through, they were bright red, and with the Southern Pacific trains coming through. You know, there were several trains out in the morning, several trains back at night, hauling commuters back and forth.
Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, Bob and Fred were at the end of our interview, but for our viewers, we're going to visit Fred and Bob in their train habitats. And we've already visited Fred, and we have Bob to go.
Wonderful.
But
Looking forward to it.
It's going to be great fun to see what the trains were like at the beginning and the middle of this century, and even to the middle of this the 60s when the train stopped running. And we're going to be seeing some of Bob's models. So please stay tuned to our location interview. Let's roll that tape now. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
It's been our pleasure.
We're here in the garden in Fred Vertel's garden in the southernmost part of Los Altos. And I wanted to explain to you, Fred, how beautiful this setting is. We're here on a gorgeous October day. We're standing underneath the Montebello Ridge replica of a water tower, and we're actually up against the Montebello Ridge here, so it's very, very authentic. We're looking at the largest train in your collection, I believe, Fred.
Yes.
And what can you tell us about this train?
Well, it's a half-scale replica, 2-foot gauge. That means the distance between the rails. A replica of an 1865 Civil War type locomotive. It's called an American type because of its wheel arrangement, and the significance of that, especially with our interest in Los Altos history and trains, is that it was most likely an American type locomotive that pulled the first train into Los Altos back in 1908. It wouldn't have looked like this, though, because you see a lot of brass and decoration on it, and by the time of the turn of the century, locomotives became just a utilitarian basic black. It would not have had all these dingbats and decorative embellishments.
Beautiful. Tom has a cohort in crime in this wonderful hobby of his, and I wanted to introduce Fred's son, Tom Vertel. I'm Nan Geschke, glad to meet you. Tom is going to be helping us this afternoon, so when we refer to Tom, I want you to know that there really is a real live Tom. So thanks, Tom, and thanks for helping us out this afternoon. Now, Fred, I understand that you purchased this locomotive. Can you tell us the story?
Sure. We purchased this about 5-6 years ago or so, and it was in really sorry shape. It had spent the majority of its lifetime working on a Christmas tree farm up in the state of Oregon.
So it was really a working locomotive.
Yes, very much so. So it had quite a working life, but it was at that time allowed to stay outdoors, which caused a lot of deterioration in it. So we brought it here, completely rebuilt it, and made it to look more like the an authentic prototype of the period for which it was designed.
It's just beautiful. So anyway, it's interesting to realize that engine may have looked like one of the engines that came through Los Altos.
Certainly, that type, yes.
That type. It wouldn't have been red and beautiful with brass fittings, but does it run?
Oh, yes, it runs.
Okay, so I guess we can ask Tom to see if we can get it fired up.
We sure shall. Tom?
How about it, Tom? Fred, you told me that this is a real live steamer. How does this actually move?
Well, it moves normally under live steam, but here in the yard, we don't fire it up with the propane that it operates under. We operate under compressed air. So right now, Tom has a full boiler load of compressed air at about 150 pounds of pressure, and that's how it's going to operate.
Oh, okay. So we're going to watch Tom pull away. And there he goes. Is it going to stop? fabulous. Oh, that's great. We're inside Fred Vertel's home now, and what can I say, Fred, but this is a museum. It's just so jam-packed full of trains in every corner, up and down walls. No lie, I've never seen anything like it. And we could be here for days, and you could be telling us stories about all of these trains, but this one is a special one to Los Altos, isn't it, Fred?
Oh, it sure is. This is a model of a prototype that Southern Pacific very definitely used through the Los Altos service for many, many years. And in fact, the number of this locomotive is number 2479, a Pacific type. And the actual locomotive right now is in San Jose. Southern Pacific had donated it to Santa Clara County, and it was on display outside of their fairgrounds for many years, until a few years back a group was formed for its restoration, and it won't be long before that train will run once again.
Oh, that'll be terrific.
So
now,
that'll be very exciting.
We were talking before, and you mentioned that there are two different kinds of engines, a Pacific type and an Atlantic type. Now, could you show us what the differences could be?
Well, there actually are there are many different types with many different names, but the two we've been referring to today are the American type, which was one of the earliest configurations, a 440. The first number indicates the front pilot truck that, in this case, has 4 small wheels. The pilot truck was very important to guide a train around curves at speed. The next number indicates the number of drivers, and in this case we have 6 drivers. These are the ones that power the train down the track. And the trailing truck, which is the last number, in this case is a 2. There are 2 wheels there. It supports the boiler.
Oh, now I know. Now, this train would have run, we talked earlier about the train outside in the garden running at the turn of the century. What would be the time span for this particular train?
1920s, certainly through the 50s, when steam was finally abandoned.
Okay, so the steam was abandoned in the 50s, but we know that the train ran up through the 60s.
Very true.
So what replaced it?
It was replaced by a diesel locomotive of the type that we see at the end of the table here.
Okay.
And that was also, would very likely have been the paint scheme that was used on the Los Altos branch at that time too. The particular designation would be a GP9. The GP stood for a general purpose diesel locomotive.
Okay, so this would have run probably through the 60s then, or 64, whenever it stopped running.
That would have very likely powered, in fact it was a GP9 that powered the last train into Los Altos on January 27th, 1964. It would have been probably around 6 o'clock in the evening that it was heading south from San Francisco, and train number 132.
This guy knows his history. Well, we have a special surprise in store now. We're going to go upstairs, and we have some more to look at, don't we, Fred?
More to look at. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're now in the attic of Fred's home. And Fred, this is quite an elaborate setup you have here. Buildings, you have lots of track laid. I see quite a few trains. Could you tell us could you tell us a little bit about what you have up here?
Well, the family saw all this unused space up here that was just getting used for storage, and we found what a perfect spot to put a train layout in, and that's how it really came about. There's a particular engine that we have up here that we'd like to draw attention to because of the particular sound system that has evolved with model trains today. And it's also significant in the fact that we would use such a sound system for the Los Altos
new
museum. Right, yes.
Great. And that's the Caltrain engine that we see there.
Yes, we have a Caltrain engine, a model of the same engines that are used today on the San Francisco Peninsula run.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this has been so much fun, Fred, to come and visit with you and Tom, see your layout here at your home. It's just been so much fun for us, and I know it will be for our viewers. I thought maybe we could end our sequence here by listening to that train, seeing and listening to the sound.
That's what we'll do, and thank you very much. It's really been our pleasure.
Oh, good.
Now departing Santa Clara Depot for all points north. Welcome aboard. Welcome aboard. Aboard!
Now, Bob, we're in the middle of this beautiful layout. I'm just amazed. And this is the culmination, I guess, of a lifetime hobby. And we're going to be building a train diorama, Los Altos diorama, for our new museum as part of our permanent exhibit. And I'm just excited about the level of detail that you bring into these models. And this Tahoe Hotel over here is just marvelous. And I thought maybe you could describe the scene for us and sort of give us an idea of perhaps what we might see in the Los Altos exhibit.
Oh, I'd love to. This scene is based on a real hotel that once existed at Tahoe City on the edge of Lake Tahoe. At one time, you could actually take a train from Oakland, a Pullman car, go to sleep, get off the train in Tahoe City, and then take a little narrow gauge train down to the hotel at Tahoe, in Tahoe City. And what I've tried to do is recreate the feeling of a resort hotel here. And if you look carefully, you can see people playing croquet, people at a golf pitch, and there are people enjoying the sun, feeding a dog, people taking sun baths, people floating in rafts and inner tubes out on the water.
Even a snack stand.
Yeah, there's a snack stand selling hot dogs, and near that is a photographer taking some holiday makers on the wharf. There's an outdoor eating area. The station wagon belonging to the hotel is there. There's a fire circle and a place where you can rent horses. And then further over, there's even some people playing horseshoes.
Oh, it's marvelous, Bob. Now, how long would it take you to build a model like this?
Well, it takes several years. It's taken me about 18 years to build a model railroad, but as most model railroaders, I've torn a lot of it out and rebuilt it quite a bit.
Is that right?
And
so some of these figures move around?
Yes, some of them do, and things get rebuilt, and I suppose there's a couple of years in this scene.
That's interesting. Now, I noticed on this side, there's it's sort of an enactment of an old Western town, but this would be kind of the layout that we might
Yes.
expect for Los Altos, isn't that right?
Yes, these models are built to 1/4 inch scale. They're 1/48 the size of the real thing. And this is the kind of detail and the size the models will be on the Los Altos display. It's my hope to, with Fred Vertel, to build the entire downtown section, at least along First Street, and the railroad depot, and then Fred will do the trains running past the depot. And we hope to have at least First Street and maybe some of Main Street built to as high a level of detail as possible.
And I think we're going to look in the interior of one of your buildings and see the level of detail that you go to.
Well, I think the thing I enjoy most in the hobby is the tiny little details.
Let's look.
And let's take a look at one of my models.
Okay, great. Now, Bob, this building, which is a
Engine house.
engine house, is just marvelous in the level of detail, and I'm hoping we can get that on camera. What can you tell us about the innards?
Well, what I enjoy most about the hobby is this intricate detailing. And you know, it might be, you see it more easily if I take the roof off. And you notice I don't have a wall here, so you can look at the detail and visitors can see it. And if you look in here, what you see is a complete machine shop with lathes and drill presses and grinders. And then you see an area where they would service steam locomotives. In fact, there's a little Model T rail car being serviced here. And as you look around the edge, you will see workbenches with tools and tools under them and tools on top of them, and scrap bins full of scrap, and all the little tiny clutter, as I call it, or litter, that makes, I think, railroad models so interesting.
Now, are all of these handmade?
Many of them are handmade, and many of them I cast myself in a low melting point metal in rubber molds. And that way I can produce many, many, many drills or screwdrivers or pliers or whatever I need.
Interesting.
And some of them are commercial. There are people that actually make their living doing this.
Oh. Well, Bob, thanks for sharing with us today your wonderful hobby. I'm just amazed at the level of intricacy in these models, and I hope that our viewers can appreciate it as well. Thanks to both you and Fred for participating in this wonderful show about the railroads, and thanks to the viewers of the Los Altos History Show. We'll see you next time.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Bob.
Mm-hmm.